Let's start the conversation this morning with Mary Ekemezie, who is a legal practitioner, lead consultant, Emmy Consult, and she is also a member of the African Bar Association. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Is it a worthy conversation, this whole noise, some would say, about the SAMOA agreement? Or do you think Nigerians are just getting overly sensitive?
There is cause for concern, and it is a valid concern, particularly if you have been following the negotiations leading to the agreement of the final text. What has made this agreement particularly controversial is that unlike the previous, this agreement is superseding the Cotonou Agreement that was signed in 2000 and was originally meant to have, elapsed in 2020. But because of the contentious nature of the agreement, there's another extension for about 2 years, another further extension until it was signed last year, November, if I'm not mistaken, and Nigeria did not sign at the time. And why is that? A bit of history into the agreement. So what this agreement is effectively a bilateral agreement that speaks about trade between the European Union, member states, and African states, Caribbean states, and Pacific states. In total, about 79 countries, and the EU, 27 countries. It was meant to drive trade, make trade easier, all of that. It looks good. But for these particular negotiations and these agreements, which we have now signed, and which is causing a lot of trouble, a lot of concern, is that the EU sort of shifted and then said, well, for this agreement, we're going to have 6 focal points. We're going to be looking at poverty alleviation. We're going to be looking at human rights. We're going to be looking at climate change. We're going to be looking at sexual and reproductive health rights. And 2 others, I think agriculture, and I don't remember the last one. Now, right there is, if you've had the benefit of looking at some of the papers, policy briefs issued by the EU team during the negotiations when they were going back and forth, they kept saying, we want to insist now on the the UN SDG goals being sort of integrated into this document, all the human rights provisions integrated into the But the challenge is that our concept of human rights is vastly different from human rights from an EU perspective. Our cultural nuances are very, very significantly different. And even amongst this agreement, when I was also reviewing the paper briefs that they had issued, the EU themselves had issued to their member countries. They had said, well, we also have to look at security in the document we're negotiating with the Africans because we want to strengthen democracy. But that wasn't exactly the same level of concern they had with the Pacific or the Caribbean countries. And in some areas, 2 issues have come out. For something that was ordinarily meant to be a trade document, we now have you speaking about democracy and security and some sort of, on some level, power grab. And the second one is around human rights and the sexual, reproductive, what we call SRHR, sexual and reproductive health rights. When you hear that word, so first of all, I will respond to all of the sort of, it's been flying around on WhatsApp. LGBTQ, you will not find that word in this document. It doesn't exist in this document, deliberately so, because again, a lot of negotiations did go in, and there was, to be fair to the African countries, a lot of pushback. There was a lot of pushback on this particular point. However, if you're also conversant with what's happening at on the international forum, you would know that sexual and reproductive health rights is the acronym for LGBTQIA. When you also hear about gender equality, it is also another acronym for for abortion rights. It's also an acronym for transgender rights, is an acronym for sexual orientation, and it doesn't mean the same. So when we say in Nigeria gender, we mean more often than not, we mean male and female. Having said that, I have seen a couple of forms by Nigerian businesses where you have male, female order. And I think, who is order in Nigeria? I mean, it's not on a scale. I'm not, at this point, I'm not thinking I should escalate. But what I do know from watching what has happened in other countries is that it is a slippery slope. It's a gradual creeping descent. And they just need a framework to make that descent happen. So that is why there is a cause for concern. This agreement, one, contrary to the Vienna Treaty on the law of treaties, does not, an international, agreed international norms, does not allow for exceptions. At the international level, recognizing that different countries have different things that are important to them, the Vienna Convention on law of treaties allowed that and requires that agreements have room for reservation. So you can say, well, I agree, I signed this, but I disagree with X, Y, Z, Z, Z.
Okay, so
this agreement that we have signed has no such provision. And the second another very worrisome thing, if you see any legal document at all, any law at all, one of the first things you see either at the beginning of the agreement or the end of the agreement is a definition clause. So that when we say gender, for instance.
So you don't think that
there is none.
Is not also
there is
not
none.
there? Okay.
So there is sufficient of grounds for concern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Gwocha Chinedu Collins is also with us this morning. He is an international law practitioner, and he is also a member as a counsel at Charles Anthony Lawyers. He joins us virtually. Good morning, Mr. Gwocha. Thank you for joining us this morning. Well, what are your thoughts about this whole conversation around the SAMOA agreement? Are you as optimistic or are you pessimistic about the concerns Nigerians have?
Thank you very much for having me. Very quickly, my position on the point is multifaceted. The concerns of Nigerians is quite valid. The reason is this: we are at a time in our country where we seem to be quite apprehensive about a lot of things. Now, on the content of the SAMOA agreement, I would comfortably say that the visibly controversial articles, which are articles 2.5, that is articles 2 sub 5, and articles 29 sub 5. These articles specifically 2.5 talks about mainstreaming gender perspectives, and Article 29 sub 5 talks about sexual and reproductive rights. Now, these points are quite very sensitive issues, both in Nigeria and on the international forum. So when you talk about gender, it's no longer about being male or female. It has been broadened. So when the issue of the term gender is mentioned, it raises concern as to what is the limit of the interpretation of the word. Now, on the other hand, we also have to recognize that Nigeria has still a sovereign state. If you look at Articles 2 sub 2 of the SAMOA agreement, you would see that it recognizes the sovereignty of states. And in as much as Nigeria has signed this agreement, in as much as the principle of pacta sunt servanda also exists in Articles 26 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, there is some limitations as to the extent to which the SAMOA agreement will be binding on Nigerians. Of course, we know of Section 12 of our Constitution, although Articles 27 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties says that a party to an agreement or a party to a treaty cannot rely on their local laws to avoid complying with the obligations under a treaty. And it also talks in section 46, in Articles 46 of the same Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, that yes, a state party can actually deviate from an international agreement if it is contrary to their local laws, and that local law is quite a fundamental one. Now, we know that Nigeria already has Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act. You understand? So the point is that so far as the National Assembly has not ratified or has not domesticated or enacted the content of that agreement, while it has some effects on Nigeria, there is a limit to that effect.
Okay.
But that is moot.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ogwacha. Madam, let me quickly ask you this. Part of what explanation the federal government, first of all, how satisfied are you with the federal government's explanation?
So what they have said is, we filed a declaration saying X, Y, Z. We hear them. But we also know that that agreement, as I said, doesn't allow for that. Other treaties allows for that. So it's neither here nor there, the import of that document. And I hear my colleague around the laws have to be domesticated, for which we are very grateful. However, if you have been paying attention to what's happening at the international sphere, you would also recognize that there are what is the word I would use? A lot of soft play at work, soft power play at work. Now, if we've signed on this document, which we have signed, ostensibly we have agreed to the provisions. One of the provisions in this agreement is that it allows the EU to bypass the government, and the EU insisted on this provision when they were negotiating the agreement to fund civic organizations, direct funding to civic organizations who align with their EU values.
So that means you're essentially saying that they can break our laws.
Will they break our laws? Well, we have signed this agreement, have we not?
No, I'm asking you a direct. So you can say they can break our laws on our land. And
so let me use a common example.
And abrogate our sovereignty on our own land. I'm trying to see how that makes sense.
We know, if we're being honest to ourselves, that this happens already in Nigeria, if we are saying the truth. Abortion today is illegal. But we have in Nigeria today international NGOs funding and action abortion in Nigeria.
So who is...
So just saying that is one thing for sure that happens in Nigeria. For sure.
You have proof of that?
I have proof. We reported to the police once, nothing came out of it. Just saying, that is one. And it's called soft power. It's not in your face, it's not up there, but it is happening. The second question about we should be paying attention to, there is, if you're looking over the last 10 years or counting, if you're paying attention again to what's happening in culture, in the movies, advocacy, there is an increase in rise. Very subtle, which is, again, the same playbook they've used in every other country where this has happened successfully, in almost normalizing LGBTQ. It's coming up more often in conversations. You're hearing it in plays alluded. It's also, gradually weakening that sort of alarm you get. And I would use a very graphic example. I apologize for that. When the first killings in the Middle Belt started, everybody was horrified. What's this? Are those killings still going on? Yes. Are we horrified? Yes. Is it the same level of horrification? No. Some level of desensitization has happened because it's gone on for too long. There is only so much the human mind can take. And that is what the concern with this is. Would we see an immediate in the next 1-2 years? No. But we will see a weakening of our values Follow the money is what it's called. And there is incredible amounts of money available for this. It's soft power.
Mr. Agwacha, what's your take on what Madam has just said?
Well, the truth is that I think we Nigerians generally we are not looking at all the parts of the agreement. We seem to be focused on just the clauses that talks about gender and sexual and reproductive. Entire agreement, you're going to see that articles 46 talks about science and technology research. Articles 47 talks about research, ICT, and digital economy, and all that. Climate change in articles 57 to 59. So essentially, it's not just about we're not just looking at gender rights or reproductive rights. We are looking at a lot of. Personally, I would consider the agreement as a salad agreement, because it has a lot of things. It's not just about trade. You're also looking at labor rights, recognition of decent employment. You're looking at the rights of the youth to participate in the societies. So you're also looking at migration and mobility, and curbing illegal migration, refugee rights, and all that. So the agreement, it's not just about gender rights. It has to do with a lot of other things, which I believe that Nigeria could benefit from. So while we're looking at it from the perspective of how it may conflict with our domestic legislations, I think we also have to take cognizance of the fact that this agreement has a lot of other things which I believe as a state in the international arena, Nigeria will benefit from.
Interesting that you call it a silent agreement. I'm just hoping it doesn't have anything that can cause some kind of diarrhea, because that's what Ms. Kemizie seems to be talking about here now. Let's say that this is an opener of conversations about this matter, because it is not just something that is going to go away. And with the issues raised so far, we definitely have quite a length of way to go on this matter. Thank you so much for joining us. Agwacha Chinedu Collins is an international law practitioner. He's also a counsel at Charles Anthony Lawyers. And we've also had Mary Kemizie, a legal practitioner, lead consultant at MA Consult, and she's a member of the African Bar Association. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're back right after now for another conversation equally interesting. Do stay with us.